Hello everyone. It's been a while, but recently I've been working on a little game project called Shooter Project because I don't have a name for it. But basically it's a shooter game. The closest thing I can compare what my final vision is to Cruelty Squad. If anyone's played that, you might have a vague idea of what I want. This video is specifically about the second major update, I guess you can call it, the Alpha V2 version, and all the changes I've made. Because I was kind of short-sighted, I don't have that much footage for Alpha V1, so you're kind of gonna have to go without a rough idea of what happened in Alpha V1, but I'll try to explain everything as the video goes on. So one of the biggest issues that enemies had in the first version of the Alpha was their eyesight, or lack thereof. They had a lot of trouble actually seeing the player because their eyesight was very narrow. It had like no field of vision and they could only see like 3 feet in front of them. So I had to rework the way the vision worked, not just increase what was already there, but rework it entirely. The specifics behind it are kind of not something I want to go into this video, so I might make a post about it on Tumblr, but all you need to know is I reworked the way that vision works, and they are very good at seeing. Honestly, maybe a bit too good at seeing. But just increasing eyesight isn't the only thing I did to make their vision better. I also made them kind of sway left to right, because they're supposed to be bodyguards. So they kind of sway a little bit from side to side, so they have a better chance of seeing you if you're in their field of view. Vision isn't the only thing I changed about the enemies for Alpha V2. A lot of which is just more minor things that you may or may not even notice while playing the game, and a lot of other ones are very major changes. One of the more minor ones I added is kind of a reaction time. You have to be in an enemy's vision for a quarter of a second before they even realize you're there. I don't know how necessary this is. It might even be hard to tell, but I just added it because I felt like it would be more slightly realistic. Another one is an issue people had when they were playtesting the first alpha, which is enemies don't notice you if you hit them from behind. So I just added a little feature where if you hit an enemy and they don't see you, they'll kind of look at the direction they got hit to see if anyone was there. It needs a bit of tweaking. It doesn't work well with projectiles, but for the most part, it works fine. The next two are kind of the same thing. I made a new state for the enemy where if they reach the last known location of the player, they'll kind of stand around, search the area to see if the player is there, and if they don't find the player within a certain amount of time, they'll just retreat back to their old spot. This is just done for more realism and so that you don't have enemies chasing you the entire level. And the last one is that enemies can just open doors. This is so that, you can't just close the door and all the enemies are confused of how to get to you. In terms of raw additions to the game, there hasn't really been that many for the Alpha V2, but I'll talk about the handful I've made. So I wanted to have a melee weapon in the game so you weren't restricted to just guns. And the first one I added was a sword. It's a usual sword. If you played any RPG ever, you know how this sword works. In Alpha V1, a lot of people complained about not having a way of healing, which I did agree, there needed to be a way of healing, but I didn't want to have raw regeneration, and the only other suggestion someone had was to have enemies drop health packs, which I also felt like didn't really fit in with what I wanted the game to be. So my solution was to have an item in the inventory called the syringe, which is used as a healing. Now, one thing I find funny is that a lot of people thought the syringe was funny because it reminded them of heroin. I didn't intend that, but I think it's funny as well, so I'm keeping it as a syringe. But one change I might make is instead of having just a raw syringe you pull out of thin air, I might make like a first aid kit, and you pull the syringe out of the first aid kit, because I feel like that might be more realistic. There's only really one addition, if you can call it, and that's just like minor decorations I added to around the first level. Nothing really that special, except for this fridge, because you can open the fridge, and I think that's kind of cool. But besides that, nothing too major has really been added. One last thing I wanted to discuss is kind of miscellaneous or quality of life things I added to Alpha V3 to make the game just a little bit better. So I wanted to have bunny hopping in the game so that movement isn't completely boring. And in the first version, the alpha did have it, but it was kind of off. Like it wasn't how bee hopping works in like Quake or Half-Life. or whatever. So I just modified the physics a little bit to make it more accurate to actual bee hopping. You're able to kind of cancel out of certain actions by just switching the items in your inventory. So if you're doing certain actions, you're kind of locked into that action until you are done with the action. I don't know if I explained that right. I increased the door animation by 2 times. So you're not waiting 20 years for a door to open. Although after looking back at the project, I might increase door speed even more. I'll just wait till Alpha V3. I made it so you can go through your inventory using the scroll wheel. This is a minor thing because I noticed when I was playing the game it was sometimes difficult to switch using the number keys, which was originally how it worked. So now the fact you can do both is kind of nice. In the first alpha version, fall damage was incredibly strict. Like, in the level, there's these deaths, and if you jumped off the death, you would take fall damage from that. So I just modified the formula a little bit so that fall damage is less strict. I still think it's like pretty harsh how much fall damage you take, but you won't like die if you fall 2 feet, basically. Um, I increased the grounded movement speed for the player, so if you're not bunny hopping, it doesn't feel like it takes 20 years to get everywhere. Some people suggested adding a sprint. I'm on the fence about adding sprinting to the game because I feel like I don't know. Maybe it's just the speedrunner brain in me, but I feel like if bunny hopping exists, having a sprint is kind of counterintuitive, but I'll see about that. I added auto aim to all the guns. Um, you still have to aim. It's not like an aimbot, but basically, what the game will do is it'll calculate where your gun is and where your crosshair is, and it'll kind of automatically aim the bullet to the crosshair. There was a visual bug where you could clip weapons through walls, and I just fixed that. It's a relatively easy thing to fix. I added a level border so that you couldn't just jump off the entire level. And last but not least, I just added basic texturing to the level. Almost all of these textures will probably be updated at some point, but for right now, they're better than nothing. Before I end off the video, I just want to make a little quick section on what I plan to do in the future. I will say this, I'm working on a different, relatively small project at the moment, so the next video devlog will most likely not be about this game. I'm hoping that next one, I was originally aiming for the end of this month for that project to be done, but considering, admittedly, the project is much bigger than I thought it would be, and lack of motivation I've had recently, it might not be till the end of May, but I'm hoping end of May at the absolute latest I'll be done with that project. Moving on to this game, um, the next alpha is obviously Alpha V3. I'm not out of the alpha stage yet, and I just have a list of a few things I want to add. A lot of these are big things. Like my plan for Alpha V3 is to be done, basically done with the gameplay after Alpha V3. So I'm just gonna mention my plans for Alpha V3. So the first thing I want to add is a character model for like enemies or just NPCs and even the base player. I'm not sure how detailed it's going to be, but I just kind of want something that's relatively easy to animate. Well, maybe not relatively easy to animate. I'm just talking about something I can animate because I want to add a bunch of weapons to Alpha V3 as well, and I just figured it would be easier to have a model that I can animate around rather than having to make all these weapons, make all the animations, and then later on when I do make the character model, I have to reanimate like 50 animations. Just having something that I can either edit slightly, I feel like would be easier in the long run than having to wait till later on. But depending on how difficult it is, I might just wait till later on and just spend a month or two reanimating everything. Probably the biggest part of Alpha V3 is I want to make 2 new levels. I already have a vague idea of what I want these 2 levels to be. I'm not going to mention it now, but I'll definitely mention in Alpha V3. I also want to rework the current level I have because honestly, I'm not really satisfied with the way the level plays. I find it really repetitive, and a lot of people are confused, and I honestly think the change I make will make both of those issues basically go away. I'm going to talk about the next 2 points at the same time because they're kind of intertwined, but I want to add I guess you could call it a suspicion system, which is basically, depending on the actions you do in a level, you'll basically be seen as more and more of a criminal. And you might think that, well, what does this feature do? Well, the more suspicion you have, the more likely a new enemy type will spawn to try to track you down. This will be police type. So currently there's only bodyguard type enemies. They stand in one place. I might add them patrolling an area. But what police will do is that they'll spawn into the level, go to your location, and then try to attack you. So there's kind of a reason to not just go gun ho into a level. Um, and before I finish off everything, at least for Alpha V3, I'm just going to give a rough release date. Now, since I haven't even started working on it, I have no idea when the release date will be. I'm thinking minimum is around September of this year, and I'm hoping to be done before the end of this year, but depending on how things go during like quarter 4 this year, this might not even happen in the first place. One last thing, I just want to talk about public releasing the demo or this game. I'm gonna probably have a public demo. I'm kind of on the fence about that, whether I'm gonna go to a public demo when I'm out of the alpha stage, or if I'm just gonna keep it private until at some point. But I'm thinking after Alpha V4, which may or may not be the last alpha, after Alpha V4, I might make a public demo just to see what general people think about that. And I mentioned before how Alpha V3 is kind of finalizing the gameplay. My plan is to have Alpha V4 kind of, I don't want to say finalizing because I know almost all the art is going to have to be updated as I get better at art, but probably going to be at least adding art, sound effects, music so that the game isn't completely silent and looks like it was made in 5 seconds. So yeah, after that's done, um, probably will release a public demo, but we'll see. So yeah, that's all I have for right now. Hopefully I will upload something before 2025 comes around, but until then, see ya.